Hi, with this tutorial I'm going to show you how to go from a ZBrush sculpted high poly object like this thing I'm working on, a starfish. So how to go from that, it's a high poly, let's say 150,000 polygons, how to take it down with a retopology, and the most interesting part probably, how to use the Polypaint, because even if you can't, it's not PBR painting with metalness, glossiness, and so on. The polypainting is quite nice in vertex color painting, let's say, in ZBrush. It has quite a good feeling. So how to use this information here and bake it in the final retopology of the object. Okay, so first, I'm going to export this subtool and put it there. I remove everything I did before. Okay, starfish, I call it an high polygon, HP. That's what I usually do. I create two HP and the normal one, low poly. So I export that. As you see up there, I'm going to do it again. A ZBrush export with, you see here, with Polypaint information, means the vertex color is exported also. So now I'm going to move to 3DCoat. All right. So inside 3DCoat, I go in the sculpt room and I'm going to import the high poly OBJ from there. Something that's very important. ZBrush saves a proprietary OBJ with vertex color information, let's say Polypaint information. If you want to get the information here when you import your object, be 100% sure not to forget that, import without voxelization. If you use the voxelization of 3DCoat, it's very, very great for sculpting because you don't have to take care of your poly count and all like in ZBrush. It's all automatic, it's great. But if you do that, you're going to move from 150,000 polygons to something else, more or less, but you're going to lose your vertex color information. So import your OBJ, but without voxelization. Okay, I select the mesh. I just saved, starfish high poly. Very often what you do in ZBrush is very tiny. It's very small if you don't change the world dimensions and so on. So if you click on the cube in the middle here, you're going to scale. For the moment, I scale nothing. This gray stuff is just a preview of my object. It's not the one that's imported yet. But as soon as I click on apply, now 3DCoat import the high poly from ZBrush, scaled. But this window that just opened tells me that 3DCoat, if I click yes, always click yes, 3DCoat remember the original scale from your object. So you're going to work in a scaled object, which makes it easier often in 3DCoat. If it's too tiny, the tools don't work fine. But as soon as you re-export something, it will keep the proper scale from your main ZBrush object so that you can import in your scene and you won't have giant meshes coming from different softwares. They all keep the same size. Okay, now that I imported the sculpt object without voxelization, means with Polypaint, if I go there and I press W, I can see that I have exactly the same sculpt I had in ZBrush. All right. So in ZBrush, because it's a starfish, I worked in symmetry, S, to display the symmetry in 3DCoat. And there I'm going to choose radial symmetry with 5, like the 5 branches of my star. And there you go. It's easy to make a retopology. So always begin, well, at least that's what I do, always begin with add split. So I'm going to create, or you can work with add split, or this one is quite nice too. I don't use it that often, but it's quite nice. Left button, you place your vertices. And right button, if you stay in the middle of 4 vertices, you just create the face. It's quite nice, but it's not always very, very precise, very intuitive. So a That's not the way I prefer. You see? Right now it's hard for 3DCoat, or for you, let's say, to put the mouse exactly in the right place to get the face. So it's not the best tool. When you have a lot of wireframes already and you want to close your mesh, it's quite nice. But right now, I'm going to continue with these quads. I use the two-click method for the quads most of the time. Means you click on one edge, and from this edge, 1, 2 times, and there you have a new quad. It's a great method. You've got different methods. Use them also. They are really good to close the mesh the same. When you have more wireframe, they make a lot of sense. So let's continue. I just hide the Vox tree window here. I hide the high poly so that you understand what I'm doing. I select these two edges. I don't know if you already tried Retopology from inside ZBrush, but it's by far the best tools for Retopology I know. It's really fucking good. So yeah, give it a go, and you might abandon even Topogan. It's really, really good. I select these two edges, and I'm gonna use free extrude. I extrude these two edges. I'm gonna snap my selection to the end. Alright, now it's better. This is just to give a very, very general shape, okay, to the object. I don't know why it looked that bad in there. I did something wrong. Okay. It's not properly. Now, because it's too low poly and it doesn't follow the shape of my high poly, I go in split rings. It's better very often to work like I just did, something very simple, and then you split, and then you split, and just by splitting, instantly the mesh is snapped to the topology of the high poly. So it begins to look pretty good. Using add splits with the right click mouse, you can move the vertices around or the edges around, and they always snap to the surface. If you want to see a bit more your surface, you can push it in or out like that, which makes it easier sometimes. It's a bit more readable, let's say. Alright, I continue. The main thing about this tutorial isn't the topology. There are many tutorials about that, so I'm gonna make it fast. Like that. I'm sure there's a better way to do it, better way to optimize it and all. I don't think about this right now. Just to show you. Yeah, it's a bit dirty. Here, for example, if I use the quads, I'm going to go in a parallel just to show you. And there you move and plop, it's going to snap instantly to an edge. Or what is great, snap to this vertex here. Oh, sorry, I'm still working in symmetry, so of course it's not working. I'm in the center. All right, snap, snap. All right, I've got my star. Well, I could do the same on the bottom, but it's going to take me a few more minutes. So I did it before, this starfish, so I'm going to use the mesh I did before. So right now I have the Vox tree, which is the high poly ZBrush polypainted object, and I have the low poly Retopo I just did. Let's say it's finished. Even if it's not, it's just to show you quickly the tools. You've got many Retopo tools. I use mainly, personally, add split, quads, points and faces, delete polygons, of course, delete edges, split rings, slide edges. This one is great also because it slides the edges. If you press shift, it's going to slide a full edge loop, and always along the surface. Well, there are many tools. It's pretty intuitive. I'm not here again for a retopology tutorial, so I'll let you experiment. It's very, 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 I think, very easy to use. When you're done, you export the retopology object, export it. Let's say I'm going to call that starfish. Starfish. So I usually do this. One is HP high poly, and one is the same object, same name, but without the high poly. It's the Retopo. All right. There is a way to export from here, I think. export the Retopo from the Retopo room to the paint room and so on, to jump from one room to the other. I'm not very used to that. So what I usually do, I just create a new scene. It's not very professional, I'm sure. The best way to use 3DCoat, but I just do it this way. It's quite fast and it's good enough. Dropbox, ZBrush. I'm just going to copy the proper starfish. This one is the one I did before. It's the good retopology, the one I just showed you. I didn't do it fully, so okay, I'm going to replace that. So now I'm going to, I have a retopology of my starfish, but I need UVs in order to bake the high poly details and polypaint. So now I'm going to create a new scene, and I go in UV map mesh. I load the starfish. It's got no UVs, so I put just auto mapping here. This is not very important at the moment. Texture, height and width. Because it's got no UVs, 3DCoat is attempting right now to create an unwrapping of the starfish. So you've got a result here that will never be the one you want. So you just clear the seams. Right now the object is closed. If I hover over the object, I always have in real time on the right part what the unwrap look. Every time you mark seams with shift, you see, if you click on an edge, just select one edge. If you click on a seam, if you click with shift, it will put a seam on edge loops. And as you hover over the surface, you see the UV preview on the right. You can remove the UV preview from there if you don't like it so much. I don't always find this very useful. So I'm going to mark using shift my edge loop here. Should be enough to unwrap such an object. It's not a hard surface object with things written on it, so if you end up with a few stretches, it's really not the end of the world. The unwrap proprietary tool that's called GU here, unwrap selected islands with 3DCoat's proprietary globally uniform UV unwrapping method. This is the one that's used by default, and it's really good. When you test other softs and you use 3DCoat, you realize that the way they calculate the unwrap is really quite efficient. Okay, so now that I did that, again, if you click on Preview Islands, you can preview the result, or you just, you have to do this anyway. Now that it's done, your seams are done, you tap Unwrap, and here is your result. The best you need to get here is gray. That's I think something very well thought in a 3DCoat. If I select, for example, some edges here, or some vertices, okay, I'm going to move that just to show you. I select these things and I move them. You see it becomes red here. Red and blue show you red is overstretched and blue is stretched, but the other way. So what you need to get always, when I move things here, you see it becomes gray there. So if everything is gray, usually it's a minimum stretch. The unwrap by default do it very well. If you want, with such an object, with hard surface, I wouldn't do that. You can select this whole area. I show you, you can just tap on island here and you select the whole area. Something that was not so obvious. If you want to select a UV island, you just look at that. If you go here, it's an edge selection. There it will be vertex selection. And if you stay in the middle, exactly in the middle of one face, then it's UV island selection. You see, it selected my whole UV island. It took me a while to figure this out, so I just tell you, I think it's very useful. So yeah, to get rid of these red and blue areas, because it's an organic object, it's not a big deal. If you've got a bit of stretching, you click here, relax, and this will relax your UV and get rid of the red and blue areas. But again, for such an object, it's really not a big deal. Okay, so now I have a retopology of my high poly, and I've got UV maps on it. Now that I did modifications in the UV room, I'm going to apply the UV set. All right, now I've got a proper retopologized starfish with UVs. I did modifications. I go back in the paint room and I export my object. I'm going to save it exactly in the same place as before. There are no textures for the moment, so I don't export any maps. I just export the geometry. So now that we have retopology from the high poly, retopology with UVs defined, and the ZBrush object with Polypaint, high poly, we're going to be able to bake normal maps, Polypaint, curvature, ambient occlusion, whatever you need. So I'm back in 3DCoat. I go again in the Sculpt section here. From the Sculpt section, you go back in Import, always the same, Import without voxelization, select the mesh, I choose my high polygon, apply, yes, you go in Retopo, so this is my voxel, I'm going to use to bake, File, Import, Import Retopo mesh, you choose the OBJ, it's already perfectly fit, apply. Do you want it to be snapped and blah blah blah? You did the retopology inside 3DCoat, so the snap is already perfect. So I can do yes. If you did your retopo somewhere else, or if you're not 100% sure, be careful with this snapping yes, because you might end up with a weirdly collapsed wireframe. I put yes only if I'm really sure that my topology is good. So, as you can see here, I've got the UVs of my retopo, and I've got the voxel. No, it's not a voxel actually. It's from ZBrush. So I've got the Dynamesh from ZBrush here, with the Polypaint information, vertex color information, and I'm gonna bake. It's all ready to bake. So you go in Retopo, bake with normal maps per pixel information for the color. So in order to get a good bake, especially for hard surface, but you need a cage. If you don't use a cage, even on a simple cube, you're going to have dirty details, dirty normal maps, visible edges and all. So the cage will send the rays from the cage towards the inside of the object. Means even on a 45, 90 degree angle, you will have nice, smooth angles if you want to. Something you couldn't do without the cage. Even with good programs like Xnormals, you can import your high poly, your low poly, you will still need the cage. You need to do it in another program. So 3DCoat, you don't have to do the cage. It's like 3ds Max, for example. You've got it. Except here, the cage, the way it's displayed, it's very, very clear. I really like baking with 3ds Max, but inside the viewport, I don't know, things are not that clear. So I define the outer shell. Let's put it a bit smaller. You see, if I put it that small, many of the details from the high poly are outside of the cage. Means my rays won't calculate these details in the normal map. So you have to be careful that the cage, just make tests slowly. Be sure that the cage, like that, have all the details inside, as it is right now. For this particular object, all the details from the hard surface are like this, going outside, its bumps. If you had holes, then you need to work also on the inner shell, inner cage. For this kind of objects, it's really not important at all. You see the inner cage, just to be sure that the same, it's inside and you don't, so that it gets all the details. If I had big holes, I would have to work on this cage, but right now, any value, I guess, around 0 and 1 is good enough. And that's all. Okay, I want to bake local occlusion. You've got a few other details, but usually I use the default ones and everything is working very, very fine. As I have UVs, of course, I want to keep my UVs there. An advice, when you bake objects separately for a big scene, except if you have also, of course, all the UVs already defined for your scene. But when you bake the objects one by one, bake a big texture, big size. This way you will have very clean, very detailed normal maps, ambient occlusion, and texture. And later, when you resize all this, well, it will be a resize from a high and clean image, which will always give you best results. So work on big images like that and bake. Good thing about 3DCoat, it manages high poly objects much better than 3ds Max, that I enjoy using also. So it's, yeah, very often now I use it to bake. It goes much faster. And that's all. So my Vox tree, I can hide it. Now I go inside the paint room that's been updated by 3DCoat. And that's all. In the paint room, as you can see, you've got this layer 1 that's been created with the color information from the Polypaint of ZBrush. That's the great thing. Before I didn't know you could do that. You've got the normal map information, which creates so many details. I mean, it's a revolution, normal map in the video games, 3D industry in general, and ambient occlusion. What I also like to generate with such an object, it's not going to be very important, but if you've got hard surface or, well, any object a bit more complex than this, it's very flat, go in texture and calculate also the curvature for the object. Even before painting anything at all by hand, the curvature will give a very, very nice aspect like this to your object, you see. Curvature, ambient occlusion, play with the layers blending, but personally, after many tests, I believe that modulate 2x is probably the best result you're going to get. And there you go. You have a nice object baked from a high poly sculpted object in ZBrush with Polypaint information. I did it before, uploaded it in a Sketchfab just to give it a try, and as you can see, you've got a nice starfish. I don't know if it's nice, but you've got a small starfish, 162 faces with normal map curvature. Here it's called cavity, very often it's called cavity, ambient occlusion, normal map, and color information from calculated by 3DCoat thanks to the sculpt you did in ZBrush. To make such an object, it's next-gen techniques, what they call next-gen. To make such a starfish, it's, I don't know, 40 minutes. And more or less, you've got here the most important techniques you need to make low poly meshes that look like what you can see in games nowadays. All right, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Happy modeling, and yeah, go deeper like I do a bit every day inside 3DCoat, because it's full of very, very good surprises. It's really an excellent soft.